Hello, everyone, and welcome to this training on the new digital objects functionality as of ArchiveSpace version 3.4. I'm Jessica Crouch, the Community Engagement Lead for ArchiveSpace, and I'm joined today by Christine DeBella, the ArchiveSpace Program Manager. In advance of this training, you received an email with an agenda for today's training, as well as a workbook or a quick start guide that you can use to participate during this training and to continue to refer back to after this training is over. Included in that workbook are several links to resources that you may want to use in the future, as well as links directly to the ArchiveSpace user manual, which is in the ArchiveSpace Help Center. Everyone in attendance today is from an ArchiveSpace member organization and has access to the ArchiveSpace Help Center. If you click one of those links and it tells you that you do not have access, that just means that you either need to log into the Help Center, or if you've never created an Help Center account, you can follow the instructions online to create that account, and then you'll get access to those links. We are using Zoom webinar for this training, so you'll notice that your microphone and camera are both muted. If you'd like to ask questions, we ask that you use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. If you just have like a general question or need a form of assistance, please feel free to reach out in the chat. But questions specifically about the training, please do put those in the Q&A, and those will be read and answered during allocated time for questions. We are also using the latest version of ArchiveSpace for this training, which is version 3.4. So if you're using an earlier version of ArchiveSpace at your organization right now, the features that you are seeing today are not available to you. So just keep that in mind. And we won't be able to troubleshoot issues with your implementation of ArchiveSpace at your organization. So if you're having tech issues or some sort of question about your implementation, please email us at archivespacehome@lyrasis.org. Otherwise, we will be answering questions in the chat. Also, please keep in mind that this workshop assumes prior experience with ArchiveSpace, specifically the ArchiveSpace Digital Objects module, as well as an understanding of how to navigate the ArchiveSpace staff user interface. So if you don't have this necessary background, I recommend reviewing the recordings of past ArchiveSpace trainings and user tutorial videos in our Help Center. There's a recording of a digital objects training that obviously would be very useful to refer to. And then finally, please keep in mind there are many participants in this workshop coming from a variety of institutions and experience levels. And remember that the ArchiveSpace Code of Conduct applies to all events, including virtual events. And please remember to be considerate and respectful in your interactions with your fellow participants, myself and Christine in the Q&A in the chat. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Christine to get us started with some learning objectives.
Thanks, Jessica. And thanks to all of you for joining us. It's wonderful to have so many people here for the virtual part of this year's annual member forum. As you probably know from the announcements you may have seen, or if you've actually played around with it yourself, the 3.4.0 version of ArchiveSpace, it includes a number of enhancements and changes related to digital objects functionality. And this comes in response to lots of sorts of requests that people had made over the years, community members that participated in discussions, particularly in the last year. And part of this functionality was developed out of a specific community authored and community generated, community distributed specification. So all of these things show how member activity and community activity finds its way into the application. So our goal for you for this session today is that you come away having learned specifically what those changes were, how ArchiveSpace 3.4.0 expands upon and improves what was in the application for digital object functionality before. You'll also learn how to spawn a digital object from any record that can have a digital object instance in ArchiveSpace. You'll also learn specifically how to use the most complex change in this version of ArchiveSpace, how to use the make representative functionality in a digital object record, as well as some other types of records that pertain to this make representative functionality, resources, archival objects, and accessions. And then we'll also talk about how to sort of think about this functionality in relationship to some common use cases for how people do digital objects in ArchivesSpace. So thinking about how this does and doesn't pertain to how you use ArchivesSpace for digital objects, and how you'll want to do things in ArchivesSpace to make sure that you're making the most of how ArchivesSpace works as of this version. So to do that, you have the agenda with you, but I'll just sort of run through it a little bit. So first, Jessica's going to review some of the basics of the digital object module. As she said, this isn't a digital objects training. The expectation is that you come in with knowledge of how to use this module, or knowledge of how to figure out how to use it based on the great resources that we have online. But we'll just run through a little bit of the basics of how digital objects work and what is intended for digital objects in ArchivesSpace. Then we'll get really into the new features that I mentioned, so spawning and make representative, and the nitty gritty of why it exists and how it works on different record types. And then we'll do that piece of connecting all of this into use cases for how people use digital objects in ArchivesSpace. And then we will certainly leave plenty of question time at the end. This is a fairly largely attended session, so as Jessica said, please do put your questions into the Q&A. You're certainly welcome to do that as they come to you, but we probably will have to hold all answering actual questions until the end to make sure that we get through what's here. So with that, I will turn things back to Jessica.
All right, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Okay, so like Christine said, I'm going to very briefly go over the digital objects module. This is not intended to be a training. The expectation is that everyone here has either created digital object records in ArchivesSpace or has taken a training and is familiar with how that process works. But I wanted to just give a few disclaimers and make sure that we're all on the same page about a few things before diving in. I'm only going to take about 10 minutes to do this, so I'm going to speak very quickly, and then we'll move into new content. So right now what you're looking at is you're looking at the browse screen of the digital objects module in ArchivesSpace. I know that I'm browsing digital objects because I look at my breadcrumbs and it tells me I'm browsing digital objects. We will be moving around between digital objects and resource records and other record types today. So if you're ever feeling a bit lost and you're thinking, wait, am I looking at a resource record or not? Always just follow those breadcrumbs. So we're looking at digital objects. And you'll notice there's already some photographic content in there, some representative images. We're going to learn how to do that today. For all of my examples today, I'm going to be using dogs. I was trying to think of something that's like visually interesting and could be quickly differentiated instead of just being text or something more boring. If you're a cat person, I apologize. So you're already seeing some images there. Keep in mind, ArchivesSpace is not a digital asset management system. So images are not stored within ArchivesSpace. Even these thumbnail images that you're seeing, these are this is content that is stored elsewhere on a file server or a digital asset management system, and then is linked back to ArchivesSpace using the file URI, which we'll get into in just a second. So ArchivesSpace assumes that you're going to be storing your files and manage them in a network or a web accessible location like a file server or a digital asset management system, like I said. And then you can link those files back to ArchivesSpace. The benefit of doing this is, of course, that your digital content and your physical content, your collections, can then be linked together and represented together in one single system, that being ArchivesSpace, that you can then use as your system of record for your metadata, or a point for your users in the public user interface to discover all of your material types. Within ArchiveSpace, you can build and represent your digital objects two different ways. The first way is as a simple digital object. So here's a simple digital object that I was messing with earlier. I don't know what I did to it, so I'll just say we'll save it. A simple digital object is one in which the intellectual content of the object is contained in one digital file. So that's kind of confusing, and I'm going to use an example in just a second that I think makes that maybe a little more clear. So a simple digital object is single level in nature. You are creating a record, and you see this is just one record. There are no children under it. It has no hierarchy. It is a sort of a flat single level record where I'm describing one digital object that is represented by one digital file. If you are familiar with creating records in ArchiveSpace, this looks very familiar to you. To create a digital object record, you are only required to provide a title and an identifier. But for the purposes of this training, we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about file versions. So I'm going to spend some time talking about those in just a second. And you can see I've included a file version here. But this is what a simple digital object looks like. You could also create complex digital objects in ArchiveSpace. So a complex digital object is one in which that intellectual content is distributed over multiple files. So let me get this off my screen. So this is a complex digital object. So we're looking at a digital object record where I have created some hierarchy. This is a collection of pictures of retrievers, but you see here you have a top level record that describes the material, and then within the hierarchy there are individual files here. So they're individual file URIs representing different content. So as an example, let's say that at your organization you have a scrapbook and you digitize this scrapbook and you digitize it as a PDF. That PDF has 250 pages in that single PDF, but it is one PDF and it is a single file. You would describe that as a simple digital object. It is one single file, though it contains many pages. It's a very large file. It is one single file. So you would describe that scrapbook and create a simple digital object, and that is perfectly fine. Or let's say that at your organization you digitize every single page of that scrapbook separately, and every single page is its own individual file. Then in that case you would probably want to create a complex digital object. So you would have the Jessica Crouch scrapbook, and then it would have hierarchy of page 1, page 2, page 3, and then the link to each individual page would be the file URL would be provided within that hierarchy. Both ways of representing content are acceptable within ArchiveSpace. It's something that you would want to think through at your organization and how you want to do that. Some things to keep in mind when deciding how you want to express your digital content is sort of what you intend to do with it. So if you are looking, and I'm going to show you how to do this in just a second, if you are looking to link your digital object records to your archival object records, so let's say you want to link this digitized scrapbook as a digital object instance to the resource record of that scrapbook, then you're going to want to create a simple digital object. You can only link digital object instances that are that top level. You cannot link digital objects or component records at that level. So that's one reason why you may want to go with simple digital objects. Another thing to consider is, how do you want to get this out of the system? Are you looking to export metadata like digital object metadata like METs, mods, and Dublin core? Then you may want to develop these complex digital objects. But if you're more interested in something like EAD, then you probably want to go with a simple digital object, because you're going to be linking those digital object records to your resource records and then exporting out EAD. And that is not going to export out a complex digital object. So just some things to keep in mind and some investigation to do at your organization about how you want to express those records. But again, creating a digital object record is very similar to creating other records in ArchiveSpace. but the difference really is in this file URI. Providing a file version is not required, but if you want to link out to where the content lives, you are going to need to provide that. ArchiveSpace is, it allows you to include a variety of links or references in the file URI. We're going to talk a lot about file type today, and especially like the types of files that you need to be using if you want representative images. But within ArchiveSpace, you can and should provide the file URI. You can have multiple file URIs. So you do not need to create a new record for every single file URI you have for a digital object. That I said that in kind of a convoluted way. But what I'm saying is, let's say that you have this picture of this pug, and it's a very nice picture. So you have a JPEG that you use for access purposes. You have a TIFF that is your master TIFF, and then maybe you have a thumbnail image. You do not need to create a record for this picture and have a file URI that is your image master, and then your image thumbnail, and then your service image. You can describe this picture in one single record and then add as many file URIs as you need. So here's my TIFF here. That's not how you spell that. TIFF here, and then maybe you would want to have a thumbnail here. And you could have all of these records represented in one place. What we're going to talk about in the training today is how you nest these, or how you list these, and how you want them to display will have definite impacts on the make representative functionality, as well as how users interact with this content and where it links out to. So we're going to get into that more today, but just keep in mind that with file versions, you can include as many file versions as you need in ArchiveSpace. And I think I'm going to leave it there for the overview, because we are at time, and I want to leave a lot of time to get into spawning digital objects. I'm seeing some stuff popping in the chat. I'm going to look at it real quick just to see if I was unclear about some stuff. Multiple URIs, is that still a complex digital object? So if you have one file with multiple file URIs, so it's the same content, it's just maybe you have a JPEG, a TIFF, a PNG, you would include all of those as file URIs within the same record. If it's different content, then you would need to create different records. I hope that clarified that. And then the other questions we can get to in the Q&A. But I'm going to go ahead and move on and show how to spawn a digital object. Unless, Christine, is there anything you'd like for me to cover before I do that?
Nope, I think that's great. Thank you.
All right. All right. So very quickly, another 10 minutes, I am going to show how to spawn a digital object from a archival object or a resource record. The first thing that you're going to need to do, and if you're listening to this recording later and you're saying, why isn't this working for me? You need to go into your preferences, which you can access here in this zone, which you really can do a lot of system things, and you need to set your preference to allow for spawning description for digital objects. You can do that either if you just have the permission level that allows you to set this within your own ArchiveSpace interface, you can do that. If you have administrative privileges for your repository, if you have multiple repositories in ArchiveSpace, you can set that at the repository level. Or if you're the administrator for your ArchiveSpace implementation as a whole, and everyone has decided they do want to use this functionality, you can go ahead and go into global preferences and set this as a preference for everyone. So anyone using your ArchiveSpace implementation would be able to do what I'm about to demonstrate. And the way you want to make sure that that is possible is by looking at general settings and making sure that spawn description for digital object instances from linked record is selected. So you want to make sure you see that little blue box and that little check mark to know that you have enabled this functionality. So once you've done that, you are now able to spawn digital objects from resource records and archival object records. If you are familiar with spawning functionality within ArchiveSpace for like spawning a resource record from an accession record and a session record from an accession record, this is this is different. The way that you use it and interact with it is different. So I'm going to show how to do that. But the way that you would do that is I'm going to go into this collection in edit mode, and I've already created an archival object record right here. So I'm going to bop down to that. So see, you now have this archival object record. I've already created it. I've already supplied the required information. And again, I'm in a resource record. So if we follow the breadcrumbs back, we're looking at resource records now, not digital object records. This is a record describing the painting of dogs playing poker. So you'll notice that I've supplied a lot of information about that. I've provided the title, the level of description, which is required. I've included it. It's a painting, so there's no linguistic content, so I've supplied language. I have put the date, the creation date of that painting, an extent, and I could have provided more. And if this were a real example and you were really describing this archival material at your institution, you would probably provide more. But as you are providing more, you're doing a lot of work. You are doing a lot of description. And you don't necessarily want to duplicate that if later on you digitize that material and now I have a digital object record of this painting. In the past, you would have to then go in and create a digital object, either by doing that as a standalone, going to create digital object, or by adding a digital object, as I'm going to do now, from within the archival object record, and then selecting create. Before, you would be presented with a blank template, a blank record that you could then go in and fill in information, and you would have to do a lot of duplication. You would have to provide a lot of information like the title, language, anything that you wanted to provide. Now it auto-populates a lot of the information you've already provided. So if I had gone in and I had notes and I had added some subjects, we would be seeing more of this information. But you see that that language, those dates, that all has auto-populated here, so that now all I need to do is provide an identifier, and I'm going to go ahead and provide a file URI. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to get my image address. I'm going to go back over here, supply that file URI. I'm going to say that it is my thumbnail, and I'm going to create and link. So you see, now I have not only created a new digital object record for this digital instance of this material, it's already linked to the archival object record. So we're still in our archival object record. We still can look at in our resource record and all of that. And we do need to save our changes. Make sure you are saving your changes as you go, but you have also created a new record. So I'm going to go back down. I'm trying not to go too fast. So you see here, anytime you see a blue highlight like this, that means this is a record that you can go and view, and it exists separately from the record you were just in. You can link the two together, which we've already done, but you see we now have this brand new record, a brand new digital object record of this material that you then can go in and edit if you'd like, or review, provide any additional information if maybe you forgot something, or make slight changes if you need to make changes to the information that auto-populated. And then you can save and publish it as you'd like. So that's how you would now spawn. We're saying spawn, but maybe auto-populate is a better way to describe it, some fields so that you're better able to create digital object records when you've already done all of that description from within your archival object records. Go ahead and save it. Any questions about that, or Christine, anything that I left out?
I think the only thing I would mention would be that, similar to other types of spawning in ArchivesSpace, it's a one-time deal. So you spawn the metadata into the new record, and then from that point on, any changes that you make to either of those records won't be represented in the other record.
Right.
So it's not a dynamic thing with the metadata updates.
Thanks. Yeah. Dean asked, can it go the other way? Can you create a digital object record first and then add it to a resource? It doesn't go the other way in that you can spawn an archival object from a digital object, but you could always, if you don't want to create a digital object from within an archival object record, you can always create your digital objects and then, too many screens open. Search for them here, and if the record already exists, you can link that way. But no, it doesn't work the other way where you can spawn an archival object record from a digital object record. I hope that helps. All right. We're right at time. So Christine, if you'd like, I'll go ahead and pass it over to you.
Absolutely. Okay. Let me share my screen. Okay. So I get the fun part, which is explaining make representative, which is up there with explaining the concept of instances and explaining the concept of top containers for level of difficulty. But hopefully this will help, at least to like simplify it in your minds a little bit, even though it's still a somewhat complicated concept. Everything that I'm going to be talking about, as well as everything we're talking about in general, except for the use cases, is in the wonderful links to the user manual and other resources that are provided through the materials you got for this session, as well as other ways that we've been providing that material. So definitely do go back and refer to those materials when you get to the point that you would actually be using this functionality if you're not there already. So first I'm going to talk about, sort of some generalities related to this. So make representative, it's a way to identify image content to display with records in ArchivesSpace. So different types of records that could have associated digital image content in them. It's primarily intended for use with the public interface. So you're doing work in the staff interface, of course, to make these things happen. But where these things are going to display, the expectation is that it's primarily going to be our own public user interface. There representative images, an indication of that is also included in EAD exports now as well, EAD exports that include information about digital objects. So the Make Representative button, if you've been in ArchivesSpace for a while, you know that that button has been in ArchivesSpace for a long time. It actually dates back to when the public interface, what we still kind of call the new public interface, but definitely isn't new anymore. The interface that was revamped and re-released in 2018. The Make Representative button was introduced as part of that work, but was not finished. Like it actually wasn't hooked up to the intended functionality at that time. So if you have been pressing that button over time and like wondering why it wasn't doing anything in the interface, that's why it wasn't actually functional aside from being able to click or not click on it until 3.4.0. So, but what we did with this release was not just like making it so that button did something, but there were also some improvements to digital objects and image display kind of across the board, as well as incorporating being able to display associated images on search and browse pages in the staff interface and the public interface if you want. So now that it's there, I will say this is not, we have lots of ways that you can configure ArchivesSpace and, things that you can use based on whether you like it or don't like it. You can still, there's a lot of flexibility for how you want to use this functionality, but you can't turn this functionality off completely. That's not built into something that you could do just through the configuration file. But it's definitely your choice in how you use it, as well as, including whether you're going to use it at all. So when we get to the use cases, you'll see that there are some specific cases where you really should not use the Make Representative button if you want to provide access to your content through the public interface. And so we'll explain, the ways that you would do that alternatively, that don't require any code. It's all also still in the interfaces of ArchivesSpace. So that kind of context done, I'm going to talk about some of the basics of Make Representative. So now with Make Representative, every file version subrecord in a digital object and a digital object component record has a Make Representative button. So that button that used to not be functional, it is functional now. And actually, I'm going to go into edit mode in here. Okay. So we have the Make Representative button. It's here. It looks maybe like very slightly different from the non-functional button that you've maybe known to grow and love, or maybe not at all grow and love for many years. The Make Representative button is here on all digital objects and digital object components, and it is functional. There's also a Make Representative button on every digital object instance subrecord on the types of records that can have digital objects instances. So that would be accessions, resources, and archival objects / resource components. We sometimes use those two terms interchangeably. So that button in that context is used to indicate which instance is the one you want to have show as a representative image. So you can have as many digital object instances on an accession or resource or an archival object. You can have as many as you like, just as you can have as many physical instances as you like. The Make Representative button allows you to say which of the digital object instances you want to be the one that would be showing digital image content on that record. Only one of these subrecords per record can be marked representative. So, and it's also not a requirement that any of those subrecords be marked representative. So as opposed to some things in ArchivesSpace where it's select, there has to be one designated that thing, like a name form in an agent, there has to be a primary name form. The Make Representative button is completely optional as to whether you've selected one of those instances or one of those subrecords to be representative. So it can be active or inactive, but no matter what, it can only be one. It can't be more than one. You can display multiple instances of content. You can just put digital instances. If you have multiple digital instances on a resource or an archival object, you can show links to those on those records, but they can't be you can't show the actual images. You may be familiar, and we'll talk about it more, of the generic icon that shows in ArchivesSpace. You can show that generic icon multiple times if you have multiple digital instances on a record. So in a digital object, there are also, because we wanted to make sure to provide backwards compatibility to other ways. People have done display of digital content in digital image content in ArchivesSpace before this version. We didn't want to ruin, people's workflows and things that had been established in ArchivesSpace for a while. There are two other ways to mark an instance, or not mark an instance, mark file version subrecord as the representative one in ArchivesSpace. So you can use the Make Representative button, but you can also continue to use just a second, you can continue to use the Xlink show attribute of embed, or you can continue to use and this is actually, it's not actually quite continue, but it is, second, let's see if I can get this to go away. Unfortunately, no, right now. So you can also use your service. Jessica showed you, how to just indicate the different kind of file type, the different like types of copies you might use. So you can now designate, use the designation of image thumbnail, and that will actually make something happen in the interface. And yes, I see the question about showing examples in the PUI. Absolutely, I'll show you that in a minute. I'm just sort of going through the basics of this right now. So there's those two alternatives that you can use. Only published versions can display in the public interface. So therefore, you can only have public file versions to be considered for this Make Representative. You can mark an unpublished file version as the representative image, but it won't do anything in the public interface because an unpublished file version won't show in the public interface. So then no image will show on the associated record in the public interface. I keep saying image content, and that's because this Make Representative functionality is specifically intended for image content that's renderable in the public interface. So most commonly, that's going to be JPEGs, GIFs, and PNG files. Now, of course, as Jessica said, you can link many other types of content and in many other types of formats in that file URI field. That's perfectly reasonable and expected use of ArchivesSpace, and you can still provide access to that digital content through ArchivesSpace, but it will not display as an image in ArchivesSpace, and you will not want to use this Make Representative button for that. And I just reiterate again what Jessica said. So while there are many enhancements to digital objects in 3.4.0, ArchivesSpace is still not a digital asset management system or digital content management system. It doesn't store the images for you, and it also doesn't provide types of functionality that a full digital asset management system might do in terms of creating images for you on the fly or making thumbnails for you or things like that. That's work that you will still need to do outside the system. All right, so now I will go into actually showing you what this looks like. I'm going to reload this record. All right, my content is not as visually interesting as Jessica's content, especially if you're a dog person, but it is relevant to today in that I'm going to show some examples using images from our member forums of the past and current. So this is a record this is right now, I'll go up to the breadcrumbs. We're in the digital objects record section. And this is a digital objects record for an image of the member forum, the one that you're sitting in right now. So I've created a digital object record. I've filled out a title and given it an identifier, those required fields. I've set it to publish. I've also provided a file URI for the actual image. It ends in a JPEG, so I know it's the actual image, and I've set it to publish. And to make it even more special, I've also marked it representative. So it is, and I know from this blue designation that it's the representative file. I'll save it just for safety's sake. and then I'll go over and show you what this looks like in the public interface. So this is that same record, the representation of it in the public interface. So you see there's an area here for the image itself. If this is like a little bit nicer, more cleaned up version of what images looked like in previous versions of ArchivesSpace, but not all that much different. In this case, it does have, I should show you, that does have a caption because down here, no, sorry, I didn't, that comes from the title of the image. So this is what it would look like here. So that's the representation of a make representative image for the digital object itself. The digital object component would work the same way. So I would, on the digital object component, I would mark it representative. I would make sure that I have a published file URI, and it would show up in the same space on that digital component record. Now, something to know, as Jessica showed you, you can have simple digital objects and you can have complex digital objects, and the complex ones are where you get digital object components. A digital object only shows, and a digital object component, they only will show a representative image from themselves. They will not look down into the children to find an image to show as a make representative image. So keep that in mind. If you have a complex digital object and you have no actual file URI, you don't have a file version on the top level, then nothing is going to show at that top level of the digital object. Everything is only going to show on the lower levels in the digital object components. So that's a digital object that's make representative in association with a digital object. So that's how that one works. If I wanted this to not actually show the image, let's pretend it's a non-image file type. And I see a question there about whether PDF is a legal file type for this purpose. A PDF, as in previous versions of ArchivesSpace, even though it's technically an image, it's not a renderable image as a static image in ArchivesSpace for this. But you can certainly link to a PDF in the file URI field. You just have to, it will display a little bit differently. It won't show an image in ArchivesSpace. So I just changed this to not use the make representative button anymore, pretended that I had a different kind of file type in there. So if I do that, then I get the generic icon. This is what happened in previous versions of ArchivesSpace as well. You wouldn't get an image for it if you only had the one file version and it had the link to a non-image type of file. And like I said, PDF counts as a non-image for this purpose. But I do get the generic icon and I get the ability to click on there and go out to where that exists. And so you can do that. You can still provide access to all that content. It will still be a generic icon rather than an image if you only use one file version. Now I'll show you an example of how you could do this with multiple file versions. If you wanted to have both the image display and you wanted to make that image clickable to go out to where the content is. So this is another image from an annual forum. This is the 2022 annual forum that we had in Boston. So this is an example, and I'll show you what this looks like in the staff interface. But this is an example where I have the image and I also have it clickable to go out to where this exists, or what I've said it should go out to in the staff, out on the web. So that's that. Let me show you what this looks like in the staff interface, how I entered this into the staff interface. All right, so I'm still on a digital object. I'm still on a digital object record. I still have provided similar types of information here. I have one file version, and it's the first file version that is the image itself. I've marked it representative. Then in the second file version, I have where I want the link for that to go. And in this case, I've made the link be the wiki page for that forum. So I'm treating this as if the digital content is it's both the image in this case, and it's the wiki page. You know, maybe I've preserved the wiki page in my archives. So, but I'm not marking this. I can only mark one of these representative. I'm not marking the one that is not an image representative. I'm marking the one that is an image representative. And then that's how I'm displaying it in the public user interface. Okay. Next, I'm going to show, so that's the 2 file versions. And then I'm going to show one more just to be extra super special, which is showing something that has not just 2 file versions, but that has even more file versions than that. So this is an example where I actually have, I believe it's 4 file versions. Just a second. So go into the staff interface for this. Go down to my file versions. Yes, I have 4 file versions. So I have a file version that I've marked representative for the image that I want to show. Then I have file versions for the wiki page for 2015. I have just another web page that I consider part of this. You know, that set of file versions for this specific digital object. And I decided to go crazy and also do a flipped mirror version of this same image. So that's all the different things that I've put into one digital object record with a whole different set of file versions. So what this looks like in the public interface is this. So I have an image that's showing here. I have a caption for that image. And then we have, this is new to this version of ArchivesSpace, which is an area where you can actually provide access to the additional file versions through the digital object record. Previous versions of ArchivesSpace, you could only provide access to one file version. It was, there was only one thing that could be clickable in ArchivesSpace, one description that you would get. If you wanted to provide access to like through the public interface, multiple versions of the same digital content, you would have to model it a different way or not use the public interface for that. But this now with 3.4.0 and this extension of the make representative functionality, there's a section here now for additional file versions. And you can have as many file versions as you want here. For some people, this would seem, you know, ridiculous that I would have this many file versions. For some people, this would be like very typical that you would have this many file versions. I should note that these additional file versions are only the file versions that are published. You may have plenty of file versions, but you know, you have things that are in a dark archive, or you have master that is only for staff purposes, things like that, that you don't actually want to provide public access to. Anything that's unpublished would not appear in this additional file versions area. But anything that is published after you've marked one file version as a make representative file version, the other things that are published will appear in this additional file versions area. And you would be able to click out and go to where those things exist on the web, whether that's, on your file server or that's actually like a web page somewhere else. Those things will be accessible from the digital objects record. Okay. So that's linking and making things representative on the digital object record itself. Um, Now I'm going to show you how this works on other types of records that can have linked digital object instances. So I'm going to go through to an example that I have of a resource record. So this is a resource record. It has both physical and digital material, or it has all digital material, but I'm treating it as a resource. And the intellectual content is described in this resource record. And then I have different kinds of content attached to different levels of it through digital object instances. So in this case, at the top level of this record, I have a digital object instance down here. And as I said a little bit earlier, I can have multiple digital object instances here. I have a make representative button on every single one of them. But I can only designate one of them as the representative image for this resource record. So I want to have an image display on my resource record. I want to provide access to it, sort of in a nice prominent place on the resource record. But I want to say specifically, I want it to be this one versus this other one, or I only have one of them. And so I'm showing that. Just as if you're using the make representative button on a digital object, you can mark or unmark something, mark or unmark an instance in a resource as representative or not representative. You'll be able to see if it's representative because you'll get this blue little badgy thing to tell you that it's representative. So that's what it looks like in the staff interface. Then we will look at what it looks like on the public interface. So here is that same record. This is the resource record. It has the image, it has the digital object instance that I've said I want to be representative. That's what's displaying here. If I click on it, it will take me to the digital object record. Then if I want to show you some other things about how we made digital image content a little bit more prominent, or digital content in general, a little bit more prominent on resource records. So if I have a representative image, it will show up here. If I have digital content in general, I have a new part of what's called the pill up here, called View Digital Material. If I click on that, it will actually give me a listing of all the published digital content associated with this resource. So both from the top level of the resource and from the children with the resource. Again, it's only the things that are published. And so those are the things that are listed here. And only things for these little images that you see here, only things that have images that have been marked representative will have images. So I have some things here that are digital objects and have file versions, but don't have or they don't necessarily even have to have a file version, but have our digital objects. That's the listing here. And then depending on what is associated with them, some will have images and some will not have images marked on them. So there's that area that's new to the resource record. And there's also, if you have a representative image up here, there's also an area down here where it goes to that same place as what View Digital Material is. but gives you a count of how many things are there. So it's just a few different ways to do that. Sometimes things will be redundant depending on how you've used it, and sometimes things will be unique. For example, like if I didn't have a representative image here, but I had digital content, the view digital material part of the pill would be the way to get to that digital material, get to that listing of digital material. There is also still this area on the resource record for digital material that is specifically linked to that record. So not the things that are in the children, but the things that are specifically attached to the resource record. Okay. That's digital content on the resource record. I guess I'll stop there for a second. And is there, Jessica, from this Q&A, is there anything that I should really answer right now versus handling in the end?
I think for the most part, we can handle it in the end. I've been answering some of the more general digital object or ArchivesSpace questions in text. So if you're listening, make sure you're checking out the answered question of the Q&A because I am providing some answers there, but I think we're good to go otherwise.
Okay, sounds great. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a few different things about with the resource record and sort of how things might display up here, depending on how you've marked things in the records that are attached to it, or if you don't have a record attached to it. So as I showed you, the reason that image is displaying up there, up top, is because that specific image is displaying is because I marked the content that was here, the instance that was here, I marked it as the representative instance. Now let's see what happens if I don't mark that as the representative instance. Okay, so now nothing is marked representative at this level. Nothing's marked representative at this level, but I do have an instance, a digital object instance at this level. Let's look at the published. Okay, so what it has done is it is actually looking down into it's looking down into further down records here. So I don't have anything marked representative at this level, but I must have something marked representative further down. So in this case, the very first one that I have marked here is for those older materials related to the forum. And I do have something here marked as representative. So ArchivesSpace in this case, there's nothing marked representative at that top level, but it still really, really wants to find an image. So it's looking down into the children to find something, the first something that is marked representative. And that happens to be this first one, which is that digital object that had many file versions. If I click on the image here, it'll take me to that digital object record with those many file versions. So, and that's because ArchivesSpace really wants to show an image if it can. And because it's assuming if you're using the make representative functionality, if you're using that button, it's because you want there to be an image. So it's doing that first. If I didn't have anything, and I'm going to go back here. If I didn't have this marked representative, and this is obviously a very small resource, so it's easier to kind of track through, but there would be other situations where it wouldn't be quite as easy. I'm going to go down to this instance. Is this marked representative? No. Join me on this journey. So this is also not marked. I'm going to unmark that representative, and I think I got to do one last one just for the purposes of demonstrating what happens. And I'm going to unmark this one. Okay. So in this case, so I now have, as far as I know, I do know, I don't have anything marked representative here anymore. The last thing that I have here does not have a digital object instance at all, so it's not something that could be representative anyway. And then let's look at this. It might take the indexing a little bit to catch up, but let's see if it's caught up. Okay, it has caught up. So actually it hasn't caught up because I went to the wrong thing. Let me go to the top. Okay, now we'll look. We're at the top. We're at the top of the resource now on the staff level. And we're going over to the public interface, and we're at the top level. We're on the resource at the top level here. And what has changed here is that instead of an image displaying from itself, or an image displaying from one of its children that had a representative image marked, it has a generic icon linked there for the instance, non-representative instance that is linked there to itself. And so just with any of these things with the generic icon, if I click on this, it will take me out to the file URI for it. And so where that thing exists out on the web. So, this is, and that could be a PDF. It's sitting out there on its own on a web server. It could be a record page in Content DM. It could be, the full database record from somewhere else. It could be any of those things, but whatever it is, it's not going to display as an image in ArchivesSpace because it doesn't have make representative noted on it. So that's a way that you can still, if you really don't want to show images at all in a resource, even though it's going to try valiantly ArchivesSpace is going to try valiantly to find one that you have indicated you want to show. If it doesn't find one, you still have the possibility of having a generic icon show up here on the top level, as long as there's a digital object instance linked up there at the top level. And it still is the case, no matter what, that if you don't want anything to show up here at all, because you don't have any digital instances attached up here at all, that there's this digital material section of the record that provides the links to any instances that you have that are attached. So it's including ones that don't have file versions. So there still are many ways to get access to that content. It's just some ways will be maybe, a little bit nicer looking, or, that, have a little bit more, certainly a little bit more visual appeal than others. But none of the sort of the avenues that you would have had before are closed off to you through this functionality having been added. It's just, you provide some things you have to do a little bit differently, and some things you do the same. You just ignore the make representative functionality that's been added. Right, that is digital. So that is make representative on a digital object, make representative on a digital object component, make representative on a resource. And we've sort of already seen it, but let's go back and look again now that, and when we're specifically talking about it, make representative on an archival object. So we saw before, if this archival object if the instance on it was marked as representative, then we saw some differences in what happened up at the resource level. We would also see a difference in what happens on the archival object itself. So if the archival object didn't have, if it had an instance, but the instance was not marked representative, ArchivesSpace would assume it's not an image, and so not to show an image there. And so instead it would show the generic icon. But if I've marked it representative, as I just did, then it will assume that I want to show an image, and it will show this image. And again, it will, by clicking on that image or going to the link to it in the digital material section of the record, I would be able to then go out to that digital object record where all those different file versions exist. So again, there's different ways to get access to that content, and different ways to designate whether you do or do not want an image to display on an archival object. Now, an archival object, ArchivesSpace, the resource record is very hierarchical. An archival object can also have children, but an archival object is looking to itself for digital material to show. Okay, so that is make representative on an archival object. The last record type that I will show is, and now I've got so many tabs open that it's going to take me just a few minutes to find it. The last one that I will show is what this looks like on an accession record. Okay, this one, the accession record, I got away from the annual forum theme, and I made an accession record for a group of summer camp records. So I can, just as with the other record types, I can make a digital object instance for a accession. And I can link as many digital object instances as I like on an accession. And I can mark only one as the representative image. So I can use the make representative button to mark it or not mark it as the representative image. If I have it not marked as the representative image, it will look like what some of the other types of records have looked like if they don't have a representative image. Oh, actually, sorry. It will look different. This is why I wanted to talk about this. It will look different from what the other record types will look like. Okay, so first let's look at the one where it looks the same. All right, instance. I want to make it representative. All right, it is representative now. Now I'm going to go over and I'm going to look at what this looks like on the public user interface. So on the public user interface, I will get an image on an accession, which I think is new. Accessions sometimes are a little bit like left behind on some of the functionality that we have. So now you do have the ability to show an image on an accession, as well as provide access to links to the digital content through the accession record. So you have that. But you can also do the same. I mean, you can also have a digital object instance on an accession, but not mark it representative. Now, the thing that is different that may be a case of this functionality like not quite being implemented for all record types yet, is that if you have not marked your instance representative on an accession, then no generic icon is going to show up here. You still can get access to that content through the digital material section in the accession record. So it's not that you can't provide access to it. It's not that someone can't click, be in the accession record and click to find the digital content that's linked to it. It's just there's not that kind of prominent area up top there on the record that has a generic icon on it. But if you have an image that you want to show, and you want that to be there, that will work the same as it would have worked in some of these other record types that I've shown you. You will have a pretty prominent area up at the top. It will have an image in there, and it will also, if you click on it, it will go out to the actual digital object record for that content. And that digital object record might have a whole bunch of other file versions, or it might just have the file version for the one image that you're showing on the accession. So I think those are the main things. Those are the most complicated things. Putting it into words is really lovely, I have to tell you, but the user docs team have worked hard with Jessica and me to put documentation together for this. I would encourage you definitely to go to the documentation and also work through examples yourself. That's probably going to help it stick really well. But it's just as with some of these other concepts in ArchivesSpace, these are complicated concepts. I do want to show you, we've probably seen these incidentally through the other sort of jumping around that I've been doing, but I also wanted to show you that again, we've improved some of the ways that digital object images and information about digital objects that are linked to different types of records, file versions that are linked to digital objects that are linked to various types of records. We've made it more prominent in different areas of the application where those images show. So here we're in the browse area for digital materials in the public user interface. Some of these actually show digital images because there are things marked representative in those records. We also have some improved breadcrumbing here for if a digital object is linked to multiple other record types in ArchivesSpace. So in this case, this digital object is linked to both a resource record and it's linked to an archival object record. I can now see both of those things and the full pathway for both of those things through the browse area. I would also be able to see these images if I did a search in ArchivesSpace and a search result had one of these records that had an image associated with it. I would also be able to do that from the collections area too. If a resource record has a representative image, something that has been marked make representative, or using those two backups, I would be able to see it in that display in the public user interface. And then the last thing I'm going to show you before we get into use cases is for the staff interface. Similarly, Jessica already showed you the preferences area, and for spawning, and, for all kinds of different preferences that you can set in the application. You can also set preferences here, as you may be aware, for what things show up in the browse columns in ArchivesSpace. So what has been added as a preference for a browse column with this version of ArchivesSpace is you can say if a record has a thumbnail image, if you want the thumbnail image to display. And thumbnail image meaning, this is a shorthand for meaning that make representative image for a particular record type. You can select that as a column that you want to have show up in any of these browse columns that have record types that could have associated images, as well as the search browse column. So, and I've already set that in here, but so I'll just show that for this. So I've changed it so that this one doesn't have a representative image anymore. So let me just quickly change that. Right, I'll save that. And you see it's one click. It's one click to make something representative or not representative. Now, if we go back to the browse screen, I have that image showing up in the thumbnail image column here. So that can be, you know, it's obviously not a high quality image, or, you know, something that you would want to, like, you know, give as something for somebody to use in a publication, but it's, you know, a way for staff members who are working in the staff interface to easily see quickly without going into the individual records, whether something has a representative image or not. All right, I think that is it. I am going to stop there. And before we move on to use cases, Jessica, is there anything that you think we should answer before that?
Yeah, let's go ahead, I guess, and catch up on some of the Q&A. I have been answering questions, like I said, so make sure you are following along in the answered Q&A. There's some good resources there. And like Christine said, there's some questions about how can I learn more about this? The workbook from today's training, that's a great resource. Please refer back to that. And then the links in that workbook, most of them are going to take you to the Help Center, and there is a section of the Help Center dedicated specifically to make representative and how you can mark different images as representative and for different file types. So all of that information is there. So please do refer back to the Help Center. One question that was asked was specifically about bulk uploading digital objects into ArchivesSpace, which of course you can do. There's a link there about importing content, but there was a follow-up question I don't know the answer to, Christine. So if you are importing digital objects, either a CSV or using load via spreadsheet to upload digital objects with your archival objects, is there a way to mark an image as representative from within the spreadsheet?
So right now there isn't. There is a feature request to add these fields, or to add that field to those spreadsheets. So I would hope that that would be, you know, for a fairly soon new version of ArchiveSpace, but it is not possible in the 3.4.0 version of ArchiveSpace. Cool. Perfect.
All right. There's another question about using the best practice for using captions for digital objects. So I'm just going to go ahead and put in a plug for reaching out to the user group listserv. So see how other users are making use of that caption functionality, or if there's anyone on the call that wants to drop into the chat how they're using captions and get an idea of best practice or how people choose to use captioning. But yeah, that'd be a great question for the listserv. Unless Christine, you want to add anything to that?
No, I absolutely agree.
Yeah. One question. So since you can't show all images in a record as representative is only one, will all the sub images show in a browse for a complex digital object? So if you have a complex digital object, how will the representative images show for those component records? I think that's what Dean is asking.
So it's still, there are some situations where more than one image, and you know, this is like getting into like fairly like detailed level of complexity. So I don't really feel comfortable like going into it right here, but there are some types of ways you could mark records that would allow you to show multiple images or multiple generic icons on the same record type. But by and large, you can't show all images associated with a digital object on one digital object record. It's like if you're looking at, say, thinking about the physical content and you're on a resource record, and you know all the archival objects that go down from it, you can't see all of that on the top level. It's a hierarchical record. You kind of need to navigate through it. We did provide the way on the resource record, as I showed you, where there's a nice little area there on the pill that gathers up everything from the lower levels of the resource record and sort of puts that in a listing separate from that, the summary part of the resource record. We don't have the equivalent on the digital object record at this point. I'd be interested in ideas on what that would look like. You might want to get a discussion like on that, going on the listserv, that kind of thing. And the browse section, if you're showing, I see this question, Dean, if you're looking at the browse section, you know, and you're looking at the results there, no, you'll only see, and this is the case for digital object components in general, you'll see the top level there, and then you would actually have to go into the record to get that those additional layers of content. You can mark, there is a, Jessica, maybe you can remind me of exactly what it is. Let's see. If you go into the browse for digital objects, there's this part, show components. So I believe if you use this show components, actually, and sorry, I'm thinking out loud. Actually, if you use the show components and you get all the components in the listing here, it would show you all the representative images here if you have that thumbnail column on there. So, but you have to do a browse with that show components box checked. And then it would work similarly for like how that browse components box works in general. So a standard garden variety browse of digital objects will just show you the top level of the digital object, but the show components will show you the lower levels as well. And so if you have that show components box checked, then if there are thumbnail images associated with it, and you have that as one of your browse columns, and you have, yeah, then it will show up there. So it's a lot of ifs, but yeah, if you do those things, it will happen.
A lot of ifs.
A lot of ifs.
All right. Yeah, that catches us all up on the Q&A.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing, and then Jessica, you take it away.
Yes. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. All right. And then Dean, back to your question about the components. So I have done all of the ifs in my instance here. So you see right now I'm browsing digital objects. I'm not showing component records, though I do have component records and I have marked things as representative and I do have thumbnail showing. But if I hit show components, see, here's a component record there. I did have some content. So now you suddenly get this picture of this puppy and there's a few other examples there. So yeah, that's how you would get that in the browse. All right. So moving on. Thank you to everyone that responded to our call for use cases. So now Christine did a great job, and I'm glad I didn't have to do it, explaining all of the different conditions to get images to describe in different, or images to show in different ways in ArchivesSpace. But we wanted to hear some of your actual use cases for the digital objects module so that we could show you, if you do things a certain way, how that would ultimately look in ArchivesSpace. So we're going to work through a few different use cases now. I'm going to tackle the first one. So the first use case is at my organization, we do not have a digital asset or content management system, and we use ArchivesSpace as our primary access point for presenting digital content that is stored on a server. We use it mostly for image content like JPEG and PNG files. So again, if you would like to make an image representative and show up in ArchivesSpace, it does need to be either a JPEG, a PNG, or a GIF. So in this case, you would follow those instructions that Christine gave to use the Make Representative button for any records with published images you want to display. If you want to provide a clickable link to the file on your server, then you're going to need to use a second file version and supply that link there. So whenever you click on the representative image, it's going to take you out to that link where you want to go. So I'm going to show what that looks like now, and then I'm going to move back and talk about the rest of this use case. So let me go over here. All right. So this is an example of that use case we just described. We have a digital object record where the file URI is a JPEG. So it's one of those three file types that you can use to have a representative image. I have made it the first file version in my list of file versions, and I have marked it as thumbnail. I could have marked it as thumbnail. I could select make representative. I could have that show attribute set to embed. I could do all of it. I've done all of it. Any of those qualifiers that will then tell ArchiveSpace, oh, this is meant to be the representative image. And then in that use case, you do want to make that representative image clickable. You want it to go somewhere for the user. So you're going to want to have that second file URI that will take them to where that image lives. I'm using a different file URI so that you can see that it works. So I put in the Wikipedia link for Boston Terriers because that's the link that we went to, or that's the dog we're talking about. And I want it to show you that it works. So I have that second file version. It's a link. It is published. I haven't done anything to indicate that I want it to be representative, but I have made sure that it is published. So I'm going to go ahead and save because I did do some changes there. All right, so my digital object is now updated. Just to be extra sure, I'm going to hit publish all because I want to make sure I didn't miss any of those publish checkboxes. And now I'm going to go look at my view or view my published image. All right, so here's my digital object record. It's showing that picture just like I wanted it to, and as a representative image. And now when I click it, what's going to happen? All right, it's taking me to that second file version, which is where I wanted it to go. So in this use case, very common use case, sort of an easier use case here. That's how you would get a representative image using a JPEG, PNG, or GIF from your file server. And if you wanted it to link somewhere, you would have a second file URI in that case. And that second file URI is where it's going. It may be the same link even to the same image, but it would be the second file URI that would take you there. The second part of this use case for digital objects that have published file versions that are static images. So for example, an MP3, PDF file, you do not need to use the make representative button. You're going to get a generic icon on the digital object record, and that will be a clickable link. So I think that Christine has already shown that. And I know there were some questions about like, well, what happens with PDFs? Or the question was, are PDFs legal? They're legal. But what that's going to look like for you. So here is just a static document. It's not one of those three file types, PNG, JPEG, or GIF. I do have it marked as published. I have not indicated that it is representative. You should not indicate it's representative. It doesn't meet the requirements to be representative. So I haven't done any of those qualifying things, but I have published it. I have saved it. So let's go ahead and view publish and see what that's going to look like. And yeah, so you're going to just get that generic digital object icon, and when you click it, it's going to take you to where that lives, which this is just a PDF in a Google Drive. So that's that use case. Anything to add on that, Christine?
No, and we had one question, which I think you basically answered, but I answered again, about how it knows what will be the link to the clickable image. What is the actual link? Where does it look? If you have more, especially if you have more than one file version beyond the image. And it looks for the second one.
Yeah. So so the question that just popped up in the chat, there's another question. Does the order of the file version matter? Yeah. So it's going to look for the second one. So I'll make sure you have that representative first. In a later use case, I'm going to talk about if you mark something as representative, not first, but in this instance, you want to make sure that you have that representative image marked first, and it's going to be looking to the second file version. All right. No other questions? Christine, you're taking the next use case, right?
I'm taking the next one.
All right.
All right. Share my screen. Okay, the second use case, we put this into 2A and 2B, and it's pretty similar. 2A, my organization uses a digital asset management system or digital preservation system. We've listed a few here, but you might use, a whole bunch of different ones, but, Content DM, Omeka, DSpace, and the file URI links to a page in the system, not the image itself, and certainly not something that ArchivesSpace would recognize as an image. But I do want to display an image in ArchivesSpace, but I also want to link to that systems page because the systems page has a lot of important information and probably also has some important functionality for people as well. Or my organization links to file types other than the file types that we've been mentioning in this presentation. Things like a PDF or an MP3 or a MP4 video file. But I want to display an image in ArchivesSpace and I want to make it clickable. So, this is the use case that it's a little bit different than the first one there that Jessica mentioned, in terms of that it is the stuff is stored somewhere else, but it's not different in terms of like what you actually do. What you actually do is still that you're going to create 2 file versions. I'll go over to my ArchivesSpace for this, and I'm just going to use this, get you back to Boston Forum last year. So I'm going to use this example again, even though this image isn't actually in Content DM, but or a different digital content or digital asset management system. But to get it as an image showing and making that image clickable and going to the link going to where I want it to go, I create one file version for the image. I mark it representative, make sure it's published, and then I create a second file version for the place that I want it to go. And then once I have both of those things, that's when I can get that page that will have both the nice image showing as well as it being clickable and going to where I want it to go. And we've talked already, just reiterate again, what the ordering does matter, that which thing you've marked representative does matter, and Jessica will show some more complicated ones a little bit in a little bit, but it is that piece of it. It's consistent and simple. Just make sure that you have 2 file versions, and that the first one, the image, is marked representative, and the second one, the link, is not marked representative, and make sure they're both published. And that's that. I'll stop.
Okay. No questions in the Q&A, but I'm going to share my screen and move slower. Well, hold on. There it is. Okay. Move slower whether I wanted to or not. Couldn't find my screen. All right. Next use case. So I'm going to go slow through this one. My organization has multiple file versions for images assigned to individual digital objects and would like to control which one is used in displays. Okay. So again, you're going to follow the instructions used to make a representative button on the file version you want to display. And again, the file version immediately after it in the staff interface will be the link. So representative image first, the thing you want to be the link second. Any additional published file versions will display in the public user interface in a section titled additional file versions. So Christine did show that earlier. Additional file versions, so those things displaying, those links displaying in the additional file version section, they're going to display by default the information entered in the file URI field. So if you have a really ugly link or a very long link, that is what is going to display, unless you designate a caption, which is why I think the question around best practice around caption, that's a good question. If the file version contains a caption, the caption will display in this section instead. If no version is designated as representative, this section will not display in the public user interface. So let me go ahead and show what all of that looks like, and then I'm going to come back and talk about, there was a question about what if you mark something as representative, like at the end, what happens there, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But for now, let's go here. All right, so we're back at my digital object, my complex digital object with retrievers as the example. I'm in one of the component records. I'm in Labrador Retriever. So what I've done here is I have my first file version, which is my representative image. I have designated it as representative because I have said the use statement is thumbnail, but like I said, you could do it any of the ways that Christine showed. I have supplied a caption for that. It's a picture of a dog. I was super original. And then my second file version, that's what I want whenever you click on that picture, that's where I want it to go out to. This is a picture of a puppy. So I want to make sure that it's visually different so that you know that it's working. And I've captioned that link as puppy. It's a very long, ugly link. So I provided it with a caption. And so that when I click the picture, it should go to this link. Then I've included a third file version. Notice a couple things about this. I have published it, so it is going to be in the additional file version section of this example, but I did not provide it with a caption. So notice what happens whenever we look at this in the public user interface. So let's go ahead and do that. So again, I have 3 file versions here. The first file version is my representative image. I've marked it as such. My second file version, that's what I want. When I click, that's where I want it to go. So I hope that happens. And then my third file version, that's an additional file version that I have. I did not supply it with a caption, but I do want it to publish. So let's go ahead and look at what that looks like. If we go to view published. All right. So here we go. This is that representative image. This is that picture of a dog. It's a picture of a dog. I did that right. Put that first. Looks good. If you look down here under my additional file versions, it's including all of those additional file versions. So not just that third example. It's including the second as well. The second is listed here using the caption, which I provided it with, which was puppy. And then the third example, which I supplied no caption for, it's just losing the link. So not nearly as nice a look if you just use the link for your image. So you may want to consider using those captions and having some best practice around captions. So that is a great question. And then finally, since I did use this file version, I did have that second. When I click this should take us to a little puppy. There we go. So that's how you make that work. Let's go back to this use case. And again, this came up as a question earlier. If you mark the representative image as the last image on the list, and I don't have an example of this, I guess I could drag and drop it and do that really quickly. But if you mark as representative the last image on the list instead of the first, you will not have a clickable representative image, but you will have those additional file versions. So going back to, if you do not have a version marked if you do not have a file version designated as representative, you're not going to have that section in the public user interface. But let's say you maybe don't want that, but you do want to have all of those file versions appear. If you mark, and Christine, correct me if I'm wrong on this, if you mark that last image as representative, you're still going to get all of those additional file versions, but you're not going to get the representative image. Is that correct?
That's correct for how it works right now. Yep, for sure.
Okay. So if you were like, well, I do want all of my file versions displayed, I do want to have all 3 or 4, however many file versions you have, I do want those clickable, but I don't necessarily want a representative image. That is one way that you can do that. So that is the way the system works right now. Any questions about that? I saw some stuff pop up in the Q&A, but it looks like it was answered.
Yeah, there was a question. People will see it, and it's been answered. But yeah, there was a question about whether we've been talking so much about the public interface because that's primarily what this is designed for. But a question about whether these are in EAD exports as well. Yes, the designations are in EAD exports.
Okay, cool. All right. no other questions about that use case, I'll stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to you, Christine.
All right, I will go now, and I gave myself the easiest use case, which is, a second, I'll share, which is my organization links to digital content held elsewhere in the file URI, but I do not want to show an image in ArchivesSpace. Well, you're in luck. Just don't use the button. Just don't use the make representative button or the alternates here, and then you'll get the generic icon on the corresponding record. If you have more than one file version, make sure that the thing that you want to be the link on the generic icon looks for the last thing to be the link. So that will be the last file version. That will be the one that is actually what the generic icon pertains to. So I think we've looked at the generic icon in a few different contexts, but I'll just show you one more. This is, let me pull up. Okay. Again, I have 5 million tabs open. Okay, here we go. So this is a resource record for the Krispy Kreme Corporation records. We use the Krispy Kreme resource as an example in lots of things that we have. But this example is for a digital object for the finding aid for the Krispy Kreme records. Let me just find one thing. There we go. So this is the digital object record for that finding aid. The finding aid lives somewhere else on the web. I'm saying in this use case, I don't want an image to show up in ArchivesSpace. I just want the link to go to the finding aid, and that's all I want to be in ArchivesSpace. So if I'm on the digital object record, I can see the generic icon here in the public interface. And if I am in the digital object record in the staff interface, you'll see that I just didn't mark it representative. And so no image, but I do get a link to go to it, and that's all you need to do in that case. And that's all I have to say on that.
Sounds good. Christine, I will admit that in my last example, I am not sharing ArchivesSpace, so you may have intentionally not shared your
you couldn't see you couldn't see this amazing example that I had. Okay, let me reshare and share just one last time. I'm sorry for that. I'll share everything that I have here on my computer. Okay, can you see ArchivesSpace now?
Yep.
Okay, so this is the staff record for a digital object that is the Krispy Kreme finding aid. It's on a Smithsonian-owned website. So I don't want an image to show up in ArchivesSpace. So I have the link for the finding aid here in the file URI. I have not made it representative in ArchivesSpace. So if I go out to the public interface record for this digital object, you'll see that I have the generic icon that has the link to where this finding aid lives out on the web, rather than an image in ArchivesSpace to kind of be a visual indicator to get to that. And that's all I had to do. And the same would apply to at the resource level. If I didn't want an image to appear on the resource level for this, let me show it here. For this record, I don't want an image to show up here. I just want to go to the link for the finding aid that's out on the Smithsonian website. I just don't mark anything representative in the resource, in addition to not having marked anything representative on the digital object. And I get the icon here instead of an image.
Okay. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so I will go ahead and admit that I did not set up this as an example. I more just wanted to talk through the two options. So you are seeing a Word document, and I mean for you to be seeing a Word document. and I got a little worried about time. So I thought I would just talk through these two workflows for this specific use case. So we got a use case that my organization stores the same digital content in multiple external systems. So the example here is one copy of the content is in DSpace and one copy is in ArtStore. It's the same content. Neither of these systems are linking directly to images, but I use the resource and associated archival object records in ArchivesSpace to bring this content together and provide easier access. Makes a lot of sense. So there are a couple different ways that you could do this. So if your primary point of access to the resource or archival, if you want your primary point of access to be the resource or archival object records, you could create two digital object instances for each resource and archival object to which this applies. So you would have, and this came up as a question earlier for another organization. So you can create as many digital object instances in an archival object as you need. That doesn't mean you should try to see what the limit is and create a bunch of them. But in this use case, you could create one digital object record that is your DSpace copy, and then you could have one digital object record that is your ArtStore copy, and link both of these to that archival object record or that resource record. And then you could add a published file version to each digital object. You wouldn't want to mark anything as representative here so that you would get that generic icon, because again, coming from either of these systems, you're not getting you're not getting images, you're getting links to DSpace and links to ArtStore. Another option, if you want to have a representative image or you want it to be more dynamic or to make it more obvious that you have this digital content, would be to create 3 versions per ArchivesSpace digital object. So then you could have one for a thumbnail image representing the content, one for the DSpace record, and one for the ArtStore record. And then you could use that make representative button on that first image, so you have that thumbnail image, and then the other 2 will be linked as additional file versions in the section on digital objects. So like the retrievers that we just looked at, you have that representative image, but then you still have those additional file versions. So it's 2 different ways that you can handle that. One would have you create 2 different digital objects. One digital object would be linking to DSpace copy, and one digital object would be linking to your ArtStore copy. And by copy, I mean your URIs. And you would then link them as instances to your resource and archival object records. So those would be 2 different digital object records. Your other option would be to just have one digital object record with 3 different file types or file URIs. And the first one would need to be that representative image. And you would want to go that route if you do want to include a representative image. If you're not worried about representative images, then you could go with the first option to have 2 different digital object instances. But either way, it would kind of just be up to you. Any questions about that, about how to represent digital content when you have it coming in from different systems, and maybe it's not necessarily image content like the JPEG PNGs that we talked about, or any other questions in general? I do know that we are getting into our general question and wrap up time a little bit, so any questions, I guess, now could come up. Christine, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Nope. No. There's obviously, this is complex functionality, and it's kind of hard to put into words, but I think it's like with many things, like as you get in there and you use it and you think about it, like in relation to how you actually use or want to use digital objects in relation to your archive space, you'll figure out good workflows. And I think like the community overall has always done a wonderful job of like sharing information with each other about how they've figured out, really good ways to do things. So we think that, this is like a starting point for people to have those kinds of good discussions, and we're happy to facilitate them. But there's a lot of good resources already in terms of documentation too.
Yeah, and if we didn't make it clear, these use cases, these are at the bottom of your workbook. So this is part of your workbook. So if you want to read back through these use cases and see which one most closely resembles what you're doing at your organization, these are in the workbook. Any other questions? Thanks, Dean, for the kind words. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And if there are no other questions, I guess we can go ahead and wrap up. Are you ready to wrap up, Christine?
I will be very happy to wrap up.
Yeah.
It's an exhausting
Take a
2
breath.
hours, but thank you. Thank you to so many of you for sticking around.
Yeah, this is great. Yeah, thank you everyone so much. Thank you for attending this workshop. This was the virtual component of our member forum, so I'm hoping that some people in attendance may be coming to SAA, and we may be seeing you at the in-person member forum. And if you haven't registered for that part, there's still time to register. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you at the next ArchiveSpace event. Thanks, everyone.